What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Real Life Podcast. We have a special treat for you today. A couple weeks ago, or hopefully not more than a month ago, depending on when we release this episode, you heard from Jeremy Pryor. Him and his wife, April, you guys know about because we've talked about them and posted about them because of our new venture with family teams, equipping families to live as multi-generational family teams on mission. That's Jeremy and April's brainchild. That's what they've been doing for a decade or two. They're killing it and crushing it in Cincinnati, and we are just coming alongside it, and it's been amazing to see your guys' response. But today, that was a talk that Jeremy gave, I think actually in like 2011, 2012, but today we wanted to do a follow-up by me interviewing him live. So what's up, Jeremy? How you doing?
What's up, Jeff? Doing good. How are you, man?
Good. You're looking good. For those watching on YouTube and podcasts, et cetera, it looks like you got that vest on, which means, are we getting cold in Cincinnati now?
It is freezing in Cincinnati. It's winter has come. It's like 23 degrees today. I see you got a short
23?
sleeve shirt on. Yes.
Are you serious?
23. Yeah, it's cold.
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to
frigid.
say it's freezing like it's like 50. That's 60's freezing in Maui, but that's amazing. Yeah. So it's winter in Maui, which means it's like a cold and a low of like 78 right now. So we're doing okay. We're doing okay.
Yeah, doing
but no,
pretty good.
I know. Thanks so much for coming back on today. Yeah. How are you doing? Did you get any feedback from, like you said, community and other people and stuff like that from your talk? The cool part is, man, people just really, really loved it. Me and Alyssa were so excited because it's really cool to be impacted by teaching and content and the scriptures in a really profound way over the last 5 or 6 years, and then kind of see other people kind of see the Matrix for the first time. Do you know what I mean? Like we had a really cool vantage point, I feel like, and it was really, really cool. But yeah, you maybe just give some context too in that talk on what that was and what you've been up to since.
Yeah, totally. No, I agree. I'm so excited that people are getting an opportunity to decide what philosophy of family they want to follow. It's like a question that almost nobody realizes that they kind of make by default. Okay, we're going to go with the typical idea that the Western kind of culture gives us. And so, yeah, just to see that people in larger numbers have an opportunity to make that decision and see those two perspectives, I think that gives a lot of freedom. I mean, either way people go. So yeah, I've heard people, more people just getting access to that. Yeah. I'm super excited. Yeah, the context of that talk was that there's a Crossroads, one of the fastest growing churches in the country that we're really connected with here in Cincinnati, wanted to do this series on ways that sort of culture collides with the Christian story. And so they wanted to just have this conversation around how does the idea of family in the Bible collide with the culture. And so I was really excited to get a chance to talk through that with their congregation of about 30,000 people. And it was super fun. But to see this, 7 years later, get to reach more people, I'm pretty pumped about that for sure.
Totally. And I love what you said right there. I think it's really interesting. There's a weird, almost like hypnosis we have in families today where we just take everything by default with families, but we don't do that with anything else, right? Like we make a decision of where we want to go to work. We spend our entire college experience just laboring and angsting over like, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to major in? Where am I going to go? What am I going to pursue? We do that with hobbies. We do that with projects, anything. We do that with everything. Like we're very decisive and intentional. And people always say that to me and Alyssa, like, oh, Jeff and Alyssa, you guys are so intentional with your family. How do you do it? Why do you do it? And I'm like, not really. We just like kind of we just get ourselves out of the hypnosis of the weird American culture of like just doing something because you have to do something. Why do you think that is that like family, we really just take family by default? Kind of like it's like when you get a new phone, right? And you turn it on and it has the default settings. A lot of us do that with family. It's just like turn on our families. We start having kids. Boop, American default family, and just move on. We never actually try to go into our settings and say, what is actually best for me? Is it actually to turn down the brightness? Should I actually turn on do not disturb mode? Should I actually take this app off? Like we don't do that. Why do you think that is with family? But we do with other things.
We do, but I think the thing that's different about family is all of us have had 10, 20, 30 years of experience in family. And so you just assume, of course I know how family works. I mean, I spent my entire life growing up in a family. I know what a mom is. I know what a dad is. I know what a son or daughter is. And maybe you don't. But because you've just had, we've all had the 10,000 hours of practice it needs to make us think we're experts. But none of us have really even pulled back. It's as if we've been playing the game in one tiny area, and we've never pulled back and looked at all the different strategies or other ways to even think about it. But because we've had so much experience, and this happens to people, they realize this immediately when they start having kids and they become their mom, they become their dad, or whatever. They start to go into default mode. These messages, these kinds of patterns, they run so deep in us. And so it takes a ton of humility, I think, for people just to even begin to say, maybe I don't know much about family. That's the kind of the shock when people start to actually say that. So that's a big deal.
That makes sense. What would you say? And we're going to get into some really good questions here in a second, and we're going to get into. I let basically a lot of people ask what they wanted to ask, and we have some really good ones that are follow-ups, clarifying, and also just some new questions. But before we get there, maybe just talk about too. I know a lot of these answers, but yeah, maybe just talk about you and April. And the whole squad with the 5 kids, how you guys have, like, what not what you guys have been up to lately, I guess, but just kind of, you guys have been doing a lot of this stuff for a long time. What does that kind of briefly look like over the years in, discipling other families, and where would you kind of say that is at now, basically, of just kind of recapping how you got to kind of where you guys are now with it, where it's really like you guys have really invested heavily in it, deeply in it, and transformed like a lot of families in the Cincinnati area, because you've been doing this for so long that it's just had a huge impact.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's hard to underestimate the influence of an idea. One of the things that when I hear a question like that, I think of the phrase "ideas really matter." Like what you think about something, because I don't feel like we're experts at all. I mean, there was so many things that I feel like I didn't know. I don't feel like I'm naturally a kid person. I'm not naturally, like, I've met these guys who are just obviously built to be dads.
Yeah.
They just love being with their kids. They're great coaches. All of it comes naturally to them. And I definitely think that's definitely not true of me at all. The difference, I feel like the thing that we've been able to get a hold of by God's grace is that I think He's just given us a new idea, really through our encounters with various cultures in the Bible, and when we were in Israel, we just sort of had those epiphanies. And I think that's difficult. Like, I like your Matrix analogy. It's almost difficult once you've had the epiphany at a deep enough level to not just start doing radically different things.
Yeah.
And so I feel like
you see everything for the first time.
Yeah, you see it, and I feel like our story, especially looking back on it, is just starting badly and trying to figure, like, kind of just, I think about how many years it took us to establish a rhythm, or to have good family meals, or to really connect with our kids. All those things to me felt challenging. None of it really felt easy. But I would say that the idea that undergirded our idea of family was strong enough, that foundational understanding did get sort of rooted enough that all kinds of practical new things sort of flowed out of that. And over time, I saw our family really begin to flourish. And so I have a lot of hope for a lot of these families, anyone listening to this, because I feel like I would really take the time to get the foundation right. And if you do that, all kinds of really great practical things will start to flow out of that. And we're going to talk about a lot of those tools, and Jeff and I are going to share a lot of those things. But a lot of the families in Cincinnati that have been impacted, I think, have a deep foundation of, okay, this is what a family is. It's a multi-generational team on mission. But a lot of them are more skilled at building those multi-generational teams. They have a lot of, I would say, more native skill in either team building that they brought into the home, or they have, deep family relationships that go back many generations that they can lean on, and others this is very new to. But regardless, it feels like once you get that foundation really strong and it gets rooted, and you get these ideas really clear in your head, it blows my mind what kind of impact that has on just the way that people begin to build their families from there.
That's a really good point. And it's a weird kind of gross analogy, but I do think like ideas are bacterial in some sense of like, and it is like they get into you and then you can't get them out of you, or viral in some sense of like they affect you at a really deep level. And so you need to be captured by that. And that really is the God's, that you do see the design in Scripture, that God's best is a multi-generational family team on mission for families, right? Like, of course, they're not for single people. But let's talk about, man, I got lots of questions that are already spurring off right here. I think you probably just surprised a lot of people by saying it wasn't easy, it was hard, you didn't even really like kids. I mean, those things are really interesting to say when coming from someone who, in a lot of ways, is an expert now on families, parenting, not just someone who's done it for, again, 2 decades, with your oldest being 19, and didn't Jackson just turn 18 too, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
He's 18. Got 2 adults in the house now.
Yeah. So you got 2 adult kids. You've been doing this for 2 decades, but not just that, but you have literally, probably more than anyone I know, intentionally thought about it, researched about it, written about it, taught on it, discipled other people on it, where you have hundreds of tentacles kind of coming out of you guys' families to other families that have lifted them up and blessed them in the Cincinnati area and abroad. So that's just really interesting for someone to have that much of an impact like you guys have had on us, on other people in your orbit, but then to still say things like, man, it wasn't easy, it was hard, didn't like kids. And I mean, I've heard you talk a little bit too about, being a 5 on the Enneagram and how that kind of like very introverted more than anyone else, very much, I don't know if you'd say isolated or whatever was the right word there, but yeah, like I just like, you like to think and you like to be and sit and stuff. So talk about all of that. Like, how did you do that then? If it wasn't natural, if it was hard, maybe speak, because I think that's a lot of questions. I think people see you guys, or maybe even see us just a couple years ahead of them as young parents, and say like, oh man, I wish we could just flip a switch and get there or whatever. When I feel the same way. Once you get captured by the vision, then I know for me, the cool part is I feel like it gave me permission. Once you get captured by the vision, it gave me permission to just experiment like crazy, right? It's just like, I'm just going to try and fail. Okay, this worked, do this, double down, etc. But yeah, I guess just kind of try to, people listening who maybe feel like what you just said, and I actually think a lot of times people then stay on the bench because of that. But how did you then say, do you know what I'm saying? How did you still kind of say like, no, I'm going to do this and all that? And what was that like? What was that journey like where all those things you just said were colliding with what you saw in Scripture?
Yeah, well, I one thing that comes to mind is that I feel like one element that was really driven into me in a really positive way was that Jesus is Lord, and I wanted to be all about His kingdom, and I wanted to be on mission. And those were things I was willing to sacrifice whatever personality things or whatever frustrating, realities that I had to deal with personally healing. I really want to pursue God and His kingdom. And there was no really great connection that I ever saw growing up between family and kingdom. I mean, it was there a little bit, like, it's probably important you stay faithful to your wife, you try to be good to your kids or whatever. But
the mission of it is usually opposite.
Yeah, exactly. But if you really want to pursue kingdom life, families, at best, sort of kind of an accessory to that pursuit. But man, because I did have a ton of passion for Christ and His kingdom, once I began to realize that what better expression of the kingdom of God is there than a loving family, than a family that's multi-generational, a family that's on mission together. When I began to believe that, and it took a lot for me to believe that, but when I began to believe that, I felt like all of the passion and commitment that I had to the Lord began to get integrated with the way that I looked at family and saw my kids. And that was sort of like, it really began to bowl over a lot of those natural, obstacles in my personality or my own idolatries or desires. And it started to help. I would still say I wrestled with all those things, and it wasn't easy. It hasn't been easy, and it isn't going to be easy to continue to overcome those things that just cause you to pull back as a dad, and not really give yourself fully to your kids in a way that they really need. But yeah, integrating and really getting captured by the idea that I want to experience the kingdom of God around a table. I want my family to experience that in that same way. I want others who have never tasted the goodness of the kingdom of God to experience it through a loving family. That's a vision. I want my family, my house to be a kingdom, a forward operating outpost of the kingdom of God. It brought all that together, and instead of pointing all of that at the church or at other outside ministries, I began to want to point it through my family to the world. And so that it sort of brought it all together, and I feel like that's what probably more than anything helped me overcome, I feel like, so many of those obstacles and idols that I feel like could have or began to trip me up early on.
That's a really good point. And I think what I'm hearing you say is the magic word is integration, right? I think you have to understand that God built each dad and mom with a particular gift set, wiring, passion, demeanor, etc. And we weirdly separate that from our family of like, man, I'm a really go-getter type A woman. So I'm going to go, push back and try to be a CEO. And that's fine. Go do that, right? I think actually there should be more of that. And we've kind of held women down in some sense. But why do you not be a dominant CEO of the family too, in some sense, right? Like I think, and same with guys, same with dads. Like there's that trope is actually usually more common with guys of like when we're really type A and want to work, those type of guys usually sacrifice their family on the altar of work when it's like, okay, work really well. You have a gift, go expand the kingdom in the vocation of work. But you also, man, that gifting is like, don't leave that untapped for your family. Like that, and to me, I think that again gave me permission of like, hey, I'm not that personality, but I feel like I'm a creative person. I'm a, out of the box thinker person. I'm okay going against the grain. I started looking at all these things and I was like, okay, I see this play out in every area of my life. I need to tap into that for my family, right? So I need to be okay being out of the box and leading alone, when no other families are sometimes, and having creative ideas, et cetera. So I just think, I like to give permission to families to like just integrate who you are. Yeah. God wired you like, if you have a family, God wired you like that to allow that to be accessed by your family as like a beautiful and amazing resource. What,
go ahead. One more thing on that too, but one of the things that we've done in our culture is we don't really understand what identity we have. Like we live a disintegrated life where every single realm of our life, we enter in with a new identity. So in work, I'm a certain kind of worker, and in family, I'm a certain kind of person with my friends at church, and we put on different hats. This sociologists call this the atomization of culture, where every single part of our life is sort of pulled apart, and it's like its own little unique atom, as opposed to bringing it together in an integrated whole. And so part of the experiment that I would encourage people to consider is, if you're a mom or a dad, what would it look like for you to wear your father hat everywhere? In other words, when you go to work, you are still not, and this isn't to say you're going to father your work. It means that you are being sent out from the household into the workplace to really represent the family and to bring resources from the family or mission from the family into the workplace. And so that their identities should be more overlapping than they should be atomized. And probably one of the primary identities, if you're a mom or a dad, is your mom or dadness. I mean that, and so there's ways in which that can be. You can keep that identity of father everywhere you go. When you go to church, when you hang out with your friends, all of those things. And so that was a really hard thing for me to take on board, honestly. Like my strongest identity was definitely not a father. I think probably the way that I'm wired, that sort of investigator, studier, researcher, almost professorial person, that's a little bit, the most natural identity. And if people start to affirm that identity, I could just carry that everywhere I go. But when I made a decision at one point, I want to fully invest my life and live my life through the identity of the father of the Pryor family. And man, it just brought so much together, and it resolved so many tensions.
What did that look like?
I don't think we're doing
talk about
ourselves
that some
favor.
more.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't
where
feel
were
like
those tensions?
Yeah, the tensions of when you go to work, am I really trying to build an identity at work, or am I trying to represent the family in the best way I possibly can and work out expanding the territory of the family in the best way that I can? So when I think about that, or am I trying to accomplish the family's mission? So when I go home, I need to talk to my kids a lot about like what's going on at work. Why are we getting involved in this project or that project? It's all integrated. Like, how are we working? This is all something we're doing together, whether it's at church or ministry, and all these things are really outflows of what does it mean for me to build a house? Like when I go to work, I'm still in the process of building my house. That's why I'm working. When I'm in ministry and I'm trying to expand the kingdom, I'm still someone who is trying to work through my household and integrate my household with ministry. And so I'm primarily still the father of this house. And so yeah, that's the way that I started to see life. And it wasn't something I did decide to do it, but there was a decision underneath that, which was I just believe that that's actually true about me. I think that part of what when you think about, and Abraham was definitely the most inspirational figure for me in this area. He was primarily seen as Father Abraham, even in the New Testament. When there was a parable of the rich man Lazarus, and he encountered Abraham, he said, "Father Abraham." Why did everyone call Abraham Father Abraham? And he was Father Abraham because that was his primary identity. So I studied what would it look like every time that Abraham went and traded 50 sheep for 100 camels or whatever he did. He was not doing it as, now I'm going to put on my business hat and try to create a business identity as the best trader I possibly can be. That's the way Western people think. That's not the way Abraham thought. He thought, I'm just a father, and I'm trying to build up my household. And in order to do that, I need to make this trade. So here we go. Let's make the trade. That integrates your life, and it helps you make a lot of decisions and prioritize the activities of your life in a completely different way. One that really kind of stems and moves through the family instead of constantly trying to negotiate. I see a lot of couples there's an endless negotiation that they're doing inside their own heart between their identities or between each other about how do we get the most out of our other identities and who's got to be sort of stuck with the home identities. And like you said, there's sort of been this trope in our culture that really says, well, that's sort of, women should have to be stuck with the home-based identities and men get to be free of the home-based identities. The way you liberate women is you liberate women from the home-based identities. And I want to go the other direction, which is I want to tell men, you need to live through your home-based identity. That's if you're a father, tell me what better thing do you have to do than to raise those children? What more impactful thing are you going to do with your life than to build a household? When Abraham was a father, what more important thing did he have to do than raise Isaac? If he would have made his identity as a camel trader primarily and not thought about the importance of what he was building into his son, which one of those activities was ultimately more fruitful? But because families are multi-generational, there's just no competition at all. Once you put enough time behind what is going to happen into the future after you're gone, there's absolutely no way that what you're going to do in your lifetime, in your trade or in your work identity or even in your ministry identity is going to come anywhere close to the kind of impact that your multi-generational family will have if that thing multiplies over time. So it's also just sort of logical to live life or to think about impact or fruitfulness primarily from the perspective of your home-based identity. But I don't think that's something we talk about.
That's so true. I think, oh man, I got lots of thoughts there. I feel like, first of all, I thought of the Wendell Berry essay. I think it's called Feminism, Body and the Machine. I read it every single year. You guys, you need to read that essay. Wendell Berry's amazing. I think that's his number one. I read it every single year. I don't do that with anything. I don't reread anything. That one, it is mandatory reading for me. And he has a line in there, and of course it's pretty harsh, but it's more of he's the guy that's trying to make you think. And he basically is talking about the feminist movement, and he goes, they're trying to be, like you said, they're trying to be liberated in some sections. Of course, that's a generalization, but some sections are trying to be liberated by if we can just get into the workplace more, then we'll be liberated. And he basically just asks the rhetorical question, why do you want slavery too? He basically just says, why do you, the dads sold themselves into slavery 100, metaphorical work slavery 100 years ago. Why do you want that too? Now, I'm not saying that's correct or whatever, but I'm saying, whoa, that'll sure give you something to think about.
Yes.
And if you read him, again, he comes back to that word integration. We need to work. Work is holy. Work is beautiful. We need to work. It's not possible for all of us to just be farmers. I'm not a farmer. We need to go out into the workplace. We need to go do our thing. But I think, and this is where I think we've even had to go on this personal journey, and we've talked to you about this a lot and got wisdom for you guys on this speaking ministry, right? And there's some things that have changed in our work because of what we believe about family, but there's also some things that only the belief has changed, the action hasn't changed, and that's been enough, right? And what I mean by that is, here's what I mean, and I think a lot more dads could do this. I think sometimes people hear this conversations like this, and then they just think, whoa, I just got to quit my job and go hang out with my family all day, and it's no, that's not what we're saying. That's kind of a caricature, right? What we're saying is we need integration is the goal. Don't pretend that you just have 17 different hats, right? You might have different roles, but you're a father going into those roles. And the way that we've had to learn that, hopefully can communicate to people is, excuse me guys, just getting over a big cold lung infection, sorry, is that Yeah, so I was going out and speaking, right? But there was, and you never say this like out loud. You're just in my mind. I was like, this is my thing. Like, I've been asked to speak. It's kind of my job, and I just go out and I love it, and it fires me up. Boom. So I go. Then this tension arose of like, family gets left at home. I got to go speak. Alyssa's not loving it. This is my work though. It pays the rent, blah, blah, blah. So there's that tension, right? Now, there were some things that changed, but one thing that didn't change that we realized was really helpful is we just really had to shift our attitude of like, I still go out and speak, but it's very, very intentionally now from the framework of like, the Bethkes, the tribe, the little team that we have created at home is collectively sending me out to go represent the kingdom, to open up the scriptures and hopefully teach to people that are going to show up. Like, so it's the exact, so on a behavioral level, it's the same thing. I'm still going and speaking places, but it's been night and day because, and it kind of feels way more like a team, right? They're sending dad out and all of them pray for me. The kids pray for me, and it's hilarious to hear a 2-year-old pray. And they send me out on mission. Rather than, I'm going to go do my thing and come back to the family, right? So I think that's a really good example of like how some people will quit their job, some people will move, some people will do like, you got to make drastic decisions. I think 95% of people, when they hear this, it's really just got to be an attitude shift of like, man, we're sending dad out to work as a representative of the Bethkes. Like he's a citizen of like this little, almost like an ambassador of like a country, right? To represent this kingdom, this empire, these values. So I hope I don't know. I just wanted to add that because I think that's what's, I think the nuance there has been really helpful for us. Okay, one thing I'll add here, or that was probably the most frequent question we got, is what do you do when like a wife is captured by this vision, multi-generational family team on mission, sees it in the scriptures, understands it, really wants to be crazy intentional with their family, sees where God's leading them, but the husband isn't on board. Either he's a little bit more, far on the spectrum. He just like doesn't love the Lord and just doesn't care. Or, I would say more commonly is like loves the Lord, but just maybe either feels insecure or fearful, doesn't really get it, or more like hasn't really just been captured by the vision, like just kind of doesn't care. That's maybe another way, but still loves the Lord. We got a lot of questions on that, and we get a lot of questions on that. It's a sad dynamic, but I think that's one of the more common dynamics in the Western church today is for some reason, women a lot of times are very much more faithful followers of Jesus than the men. I don't know why that is, but it's just, you see it over and over again in a lot of regard. And I think that just bleeds badly into families, because then you have a wife who wants to take the family somewhere the husband doesn't. And we all know from statistics that if a husband doesn't want to go a direction, like the statistics probably better than me, but it's crazy. It's like, just basically the husband kind of sets the tone, and people like, like if a husband, like if there's no Christians in the house and the husband wants to be a believer and starts following the Lord, then what is it, like 95% of the time the rest of the family starts walking with the Lord? And if it's reverse, if it's just the mom, it's like 1 in 10. So like there's weird statistical data there that like you need the dad on board. So what would you say to people, just the dad's not on board? How do you get him on board? How do you nudge him? How do you encourage him? How do you get him captured by that, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's actually an anomaly in some ways of Christianity that it does tend to skew towards the female, and you don't see that in Islam, you don't see that in Judaism, and I think that this is actually somewhat a vestige of our view of family, honestly. And this is, if when guys get a hold of the fact that, and the family order kind of comes in, and they begin to think about life from this perspective, this is very, very, very interesting and attractive to men. And the one caveat I would say, or warning to women and wives who are really concerned about this, is that you have to be really careful in the early stages to not turn off your husband from this. There's something you need his heart to waken up, and there are things inside this message that wake up men very commonly and very predictably. But it's difficult for them to hear it from a woman. I mean, for whatever reason, there's probably good and bad reasons for that. And I think that, but that's reality. And given that, it's important that they are given time. And like you said, there's insecurities there. But what I've noticed is that, man, when men begin to realize that all of their desire to be a part of a team and to lead a team, and there, the reason why men are into sports, the reason why men are into military things, they all really kind of stem back to this idea that they're looking for, what is that unit? What is that platoon? What is that group that I get to engage life with and lead through or be a part of or coach. And man, if they ever come to the realization that it's their own family, there is an eruption of passion that is fairly common and predictable for a lot of men, unless they're completely jaded. And so you have to give them time, and we got to try different things to sort of waken up their heart or help them see that, wow, this is, but I would look forward in other areas. Are there other areas where you see your husband, really gravitating towards wanting this thing? Like, does he want to hang out with his buddies, and does he like to watch sports? Does he like to sort of form teams at work? Are you seeing evidence of this desire that he's just pointing elsewhere? And if you see the evidence of that, then I think, even like playing video games, like trying to be the hero, you see men really trying to find this somewhere. And it's like, it kills me that sometimes the guys who are off, like just killing it sometimes elsewhere in some other arena, and just they're desperately want to be a part of a team, have no idea that their entire team is sitting at home on the bench waiting for the coach to come home and engage and say, "Hey guys, let's do this."
Totally.
Man, when he realizes that, it's all bets are off. So be patient, be careful not to turn him off to the idea through coming on kind of crazy strong. There's that verse in 1 Peter that really even says, "Win them over without a word," and because words themselves are really dangerous to use when you're trying to when guys tend to think that maybe I'm being sort of pushed or pressured or manipulated into something. Man, walls go up and hearts get hard. So I would just put that as a big caution. But hopefully and this is why Jeff and I are doing that 5 Minute Fatherhood podcast, we're going to be really talking to dads as much as possible and just giving them ideas, but like sprinkling around the edges all of this philosophy. And I think guys are going to really come alive to it.
Totally. So, and a quick follow-up there, but yeah, before that, guys, like Jeremy said, that actually is a huge heartbeat of mine and Jeremy's. And so we are trying to create everything possible for like what Jeremy said, for it to be guy to guy, for us to talk to them. And so we're going to have a daily podcast, guys, that's coming out soon. We haven't announced everything on it yet, but yeah, it's going to be called 5 Minute Fatherhood. And it's going to literally be 5-minute little episodes every day with tactical, practical wisdom and tips and just talking fatherhood. And, if you're a wife, we'll probably launch with that. So you can listen to that first if you want, or listen to it with your husband. But yeah, we'll be talking to the dads there. We have the Skill of Fatherhood Masterclass. If you want to get that for him and just say, hey, poke around in here, look at this, or you look through it and pick out what you think he would like and say, hey, go watch this module, whatever it is. We literally are trying our hardest to try to, because we see this as a problem. I think both me and Jeremy have actually, I know I can speak for myself, been that guy in a season. And so we know what it takes to kind of be captured or get kind of awoken or awaken or whatever the proper grammar there is. It's not like I'm an author or anything, is to get guys captured by that vision. And so we're trying our hardest, guys. Hopefully those resources are helpful. A lot of those are coming January, February, et cetera. But yeah, I think what you're saying is basically enable. I think, it's like you have to, there's no better, like dads, what you're trying to build, you can build something better, and it's called the last name. Like you have the opportunity to build this kingdom and this empire of a last name that can be a legacy and a dynasty spiritually for the kingdom of God over hundreds of years based on just your trajectory shift or change or adding on to a previous generation that was awesome. So I just think that's huge for sure. What do you say? So then and I agree. Yeah, you got to be really careful, really sensitive, guys, because I think, guys put up, or ladies, because guys put up walls really fast. And I also think, it's like the best, one of my my spiritual aunt and uncle, she said this phrase a long time ago that kind of relates to everything with any truth. And it was basically like, Jeff, you can't push people into the promised land. You can only hold up the fruit and invite them in. Right? You can only kind of say, hey, this is what it looks like living here. Like, you should come in. It's way better than the desert, right? Talking about the Old Testament picture of the desert and the promised land. So I think that's that same thing. Like, don't try to push your husband into the promised land. You can only hold up the fruit. And personally, there is a level of long suffering here that I also think is crazy, incredibly powerful, right? And I don't mean long suffering in the sense of like, if you have a bad husband, like that's a whole different conversation. If it's dangerous, you might need to get out. It's and separate for a little bit, whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just like they're not doing what you want them to do, and it's just hard.
Yeah.
In that case, there and Alyssa, and I'm saying this from experience because Alyssa showed this to me. There's a long suffering that we've lost the art of long suffering, right? Like when we find truth, we bring it to our spouse, and then you better change. And if not, now I'm bitter, now I'm resentful. When it's like long suffering itself, meaning your response, once you've shared truth and they're not changing, your response to them in and of itself is an act of the gospel. In and of itself is actually an agent of change, how you actually respond. I would say over like a couple years, meaning if you were just continually over the years, faithful, loving, encouraging, not nagging, you lift them up where maybe they aren't that awesome, right? Like, hey, I see you doing a great job leading right there. Hey, I really appreciate how you made that decision for our family. And it can be tiny stuff, or it can be stuff where they're really not even doing that good of a job. Because I know Alyssa did that with me, but it fires me up, right? When Alyssa says like, hey,
that's right. We need a follower.
That way you picked out the appetizer on the menu for our family. Like I feel so led and blessed right now, right? Like it could be that small.
That's awesome.
But she
Can
did
I say
that.
something about that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's huge because I one of the things that it might sound extreme, but with the way that Western family is designed, men are all basically expendable. That we really have created a maternal idea, and so here's something that I think Jeff is really teasing at. That I think if you really want to get your husband on fire for this, one thing that you could try to do is actually ask him, what is your vision for the family, and how can I help you achieve that? And like he said, you may be very underwhelmed by the response, and he may not even want to respond. But it'd be really an interesting conversation. I mean, even if his vision is, assuming it's not dangerous, right? But even if it isn't what you think is ideal, like, man, I would just love like if we could like watch more sports or play more video games or like, or be involved in this activity or that activity. And you're like, oh, that's not what my favorite thing to do. If once a man begins to feel like he's leading something, and the first person who makes a man a leader is his wife. A man is just isolated until his wife starts to follow him, and that's the moment he becomes a leader. There's a great video online of a guy who's like dancing. If you've seen that video, Jeff, but that guy was sort of like dancing like a crazy person in front of like 500 people, and there was
like
a guy
randomly. Or I mean, like
he was just sitting up there and he was just sort of dancing around. And then all of a sudden, a second guy came up and started to dance with him. And there was a voiceover, a guy who was explaining how leadership works. And he said, that man was crazy, 5 seconds ago, but that second person, the second person made him a leader. And then
that's true.
20 seconds later, the whole crowd of 500 was all dancing like the guy.
That's cool.
And the whole point was, the thing that made the crazy, weird, isolated dude a leader was the first person who followed him. And so it's wives, you are the one who makes, if you want your husband to be a leader, you have to follow him. You have to decide that okay, what is the vision that you have for the family? And I know this is controversial, and a lot of people have different feelings about this. But but I'm just saying to those of you who want your family to be led and believe that that's something that you're called to, man, it does take a long suffering. It's challenging, but by asking what that vision is, finding out what that vision is, and then trying your best to follow it, all of a sudden your husband finds himself with a team that he's leading. And then all the responsibility and weight begins. He sometimes that can wake him up, and he starts to think, well, what is this really what I want to do with my family? And like you said with Alyssa, I feel like April, she had to follow me leading badly for a long time in order for me to become anything like a decent leader of my family. But thank God she didn't think that the first time I screwed up, I lost my job. Otherwise, we would certainly not be talking here today.
That's true. What about the other side of the coin? I actually think that's a great segue to one thing, because I think that conversation can then sometimes devolve a little into stereotypes and caricatures. But I love what you said right there of like, and what I've heard you say before too, is I think the cool part is God has equipped fathers and put his hand on fathers to cast a vision for the family, but that doesn't mean that he is perfectly skilled at like the actual nuts and bolts of systems and this and that and all that. So like I've heard you talk about, and I love hearing you talk about kind of like, okay, what do you do? Like every marriage is a little different, right? And every some wives are a little bit more like great leaders. And sometimes the husband is a great like asset releaser, or like some husbands are good visionaries. Like, so I've heard you talk about that, but can you talk about that more, a little bit of like, for the first example, let's do that one that's pretty easy and common of like, okay, so the family's got captured by this, but instead of devolving into a character of just like a husband who's maybe not a good systematic leader, how do you still then follow this dynamic for the flourishing of your family when maybe he's not, but the wife is also really good at it and crushes, and those wives, right? Where you're actually like, man, that's CEO right there, right? You're like,
she dominates. A huge blessing.
Totally. That's so how do you utilize that? Because I think sadly in Christian culture, and sometimes in the more fundamentalist cultures, we quash that in women rather than like, man, what a beautiful skill for the team. So how do you talk about that maybe on how there's a bigger sandbox than we like to think of dynamics that like, man, your team needs to figure out your team and what's best for your team. Like, but talk about that maybe.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, and this is a huge idol in our culture, guys. We know that, right? That basically any kind of identity that we try to push on people, half the Disney movies are about some kid being crushed by an identity that's being given to him or her, and then they get released from it, and then they're free. Like that's the great Western story, and there's some truth to that. Like identities can be crushing, but they can also be releasing, and it's important to figure out like what is the role of the father, and he is responsible for figuring out how to lead this family. And so that part of what that encapsulates is, how do I release all the gifts that God's given us as a family, and how do I help all of this to flourish? His job isn't to do everything, right? His job is to be responsible for the overall effect that it has. And so he's got to feel the weight of that responsibility. And part of what he should do is then look around and say, well, what resources do we have in this family? What resources do we have in me, in my wife, in my kids? What has God entrusted to us? And so he's really that role of sort of the steward of those resources, or those callings, or those giftings. And so any wise father who finds himself with a very capable wife in lots of other areas is going to want to find ways to completely release that, not to quash that. So this does look very different, and this is where families get their own unique dynamics, and it's so fun to watch as different families develop. And so there is sort of a dance that has to go on between really investigating what Scripture says about what are sort of the prescriptive elements of the role of father or mother. And those things those are baked into Scripture. Those are baked into our DNA. I mean, these are deep, deep, deep things that are there. And our culture is really struggling with the fact that they're even biological at a certain level. And we don't like that right now in our culture. But we need to be aware of what those things are, and then be given tons of freedom around what does it look like to take advantage of all of those elements, and then all the different callings and giftings in the family to completely push into what it means to be a family that is expanding the kingdom of God. So yeah, every family is going to look different. We can get into like specific ways that might look in different families, and I just love the variety. But I think it has to go both ways. You have to accept certain constraints or realities, or design is another way to say it. And in the same way that sports teams have coaches, they have general managers, there's lots of leadership going on, but there are certain things that I think that fathers are designed really well to do, mothers are designed really well to do, and there are lots of sort of general skills that both might have, and those should be given to whoever has the skills for those things.
Totally. And I think there's a level at which this has to be Spirit-led, because there's parts at which you're like, man, the Lord created me like this, like I can go crush this for the family. And there's also a level at which I think stepping into fatherhood and motherhood is stepping into deep weakness for your growth. So there's a weird what's that word? Like contradiction there of like, man, I'm wired like this, and so I can use this for the family. And whoa, I am not wired like this. God's calling me to a certain level of this identity and role that I feel like I don't have, but he's going to teach me, grow me, sanctify me, and equip me. So like that's, or that gap, that jump of where I think I am and where he is taking me is very much like the journey of following Jesus. So that's why it has to be Spirit-led, because I think it's a little bit of both. You have to just have your marriage full of love, full of humility, full of, being on the same team, pursuing each other, shoulder to shoulder, face to face. But no, I think that's super good. And it's cool when you, like you said, when you see people kind of lock into it, right? When you see marriages that are like, man, that is totally them killing it for them. Like I can tell that's them. Yeah. Like that is a utilization of their assets, their resources, their wirings as a team better than if anyone else with that exact, cookie cutter. So I love that. What would you say? I think that was a really good section and helpful, because that was probably our main section and main kind of question, I would say, is father, like what do you do in that dynamic? Fatherhood, fathers that maybe don't know, aren't engaged, but I think that really helped. But another kind of pattern we kept getting asked, and then we get asked a lot, is, okay, then what do you also then do? I guess these are two separate questions, so I don't know how you want to answer them, but we got a lot of questions on like, what do you do when your family isn't traditional? Like, oh man, I really do want to get into rhythms and Sabbath and weekly family meetings and optimizing our week and a 7-day ritual and all these things, but my husband is in Iraq for 4 months, or I'm a single mom, or, whatever it is. So like, how do you then kind of, with the non-traditional, or I have kids with special needs, and just there's whatever it is, how do you kind of operate then in a non-traditional way while still believing in the multi-generational family team on mission? Or how do you let that be true for you, is a question. Yeah. And then maybe the second one we can ask then is then about broken homes, which is a totally different subject, because all the things I just mentioned there aren't broken homes. But then when there's divorces and marriages and affairs, et cetera. So we can maybe talk about that next. But what would you say about that first one?
Yeah. So non-traditional, being in situations that are maybe really have unique challenges for developing maybe all the elements. I mean, part of what you have to for sure be aware of, okay, what is this a calling that is on our family? Then the whole family has to embrace it, right? If we're a military family, or we're, a police, if our dad's a police officer,
then that's the calling for the family.
Yeah. Keep that hat on. Remember that this is not just the husband's identity or the wife's identity, but there's something that the family's being called into. And so the family has to extend itself, and there has to be a bit of creativity around how do we express and become a great team, and in light of the fact that we have this intense calling on our family, and getting around other families with that calling. But I would say be wary of what can often happen in those situations, is that you sort of default, and what could have even precipitated some of these decisions could be the desire to pursue an identity that's above family. So you have to keep resisting that, right? So this is the traditional sort of missionary family where, in the past they just saw that being really on mission meant that they had to like sort of neglect their family and just go after this mission and do these things separately or in a non-integrated way. And so sometimes callings can feel so intense that you just they start to fragment the family. So no matter what the calling is, no matter how intense it is, I would say the more intense it is, the more critical it is that you be clear, like this is us. We are a unit. And so, I one of the chapters in the Father's Compass that's coming out is about Billy Graham, and I wish, Billy Graham had such a powerful calling on his life, but he would regularly leave his family for 6 months. He didn't recognize his young daughter when he saw her coming home.
There's that story of him seeing a girl playing in his front yard and being like, "Who's that girl?" And it's his daughter, and you're like, "Oh,
yes,"
because he was gone.
It would
so
not
long.
have been difficult for the Billy Graham Association to have figured out a way to integrate the family into his mission. It would have been incredible. Could you imagine being the son or daughter of Billy Graham, getting to go all over the world, meet dignitaries, and help your dad and your mom in all kinds of ways to achieve the family mission? But instead of it being the Graham Association, it was the Billy Graham. You know what I mean? Like that's a Western idea of thinking, and that's unfortunate. Now, obviously, if you're being deported, or you're being deployed because you're in the military, that looks different. But totally. Anytime. What I do think, man, if there's any way you can be creative, any way you can stretch to do this more together, whatever that looks like, push into that creatively. And so I've been really surprised how often people they just sort of immediately say, we can only do this completely separately. But I think that needs to be really challenged. We need to figure out ways to make sure that, we can push into these things as a team. We just may have to be creative to figure out how to make that make sense.
Sorry, guys, we got cut off there for a second. The casual, amazing, usual Bluetooth stuff. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, I do these interviews through AirPods, and Alyssa just took a call out there, and it totally just messed everything up. But no, Jeremy, continue with what you're talking about. I think that is so pertinent and so perfect, and such needed insight of just like this. It's almost it's funny you said it, because I almost say it like this, of like you're basically saying like, just get creative and try to stretch what you do one more step towards integration. That's what I always tell people. Like when they hear this stuff, they say, man, we got to shut down or quit or do this or move across the country. Some people that's true, but that's like 5%. 95%, I think I always tell people, just go one step farther than the disintegration the culture is giving you right now. Just stretch one more step towards integration. So like whether that means you don't change anything. Like dad keeps the same job, the kids go to the same school, and this happens, and this is our marriage, and this is what we do during the week, whatever. But all that means is that, the kids eat lunch with the dad once a week at the office, then boom, that's good. Or whatever it is, like just one extra step of integration is almost like an exponential hockey stick of like compound investing. But continue though and talk about that or whatever you were saying about that.
Yeah. I mean, it looks so different depending on what the occupation is or the constraints are. But I can tell you, like, we sit down and we test every single constraint, to your point, to see, is this possible for integration? Could I take a kid on that business trip? Is it possible for us to get involved in some way? Like, should I get involved in their schooling in this way? Or like, where are all those points? Should we do a FaceTime thing at this time every night? Like whatever it looks like, there's so much technology that could help with this. There's so many ways now that we can fight back against the disintegration that sort of is assumed in our culture. And yeah, you're going to look weird. And if you're a part of a big corporate machine, maybe, it's going to feel intimidating, but man, I would say it's worth it. Like push into it, figure out, like, be that guy, be that woman, be the person who's like, because, it's interesting. There's a debate going on about, maybe nursing moms in the workplace and how we need to accommodate that, which I completely agree with. But I would say that nursing is like, that's the first, year or two, right? Like that doesn't ever end. I don't stop being a mom or a dad after that period. So like, let's keep going. Let's figure out.
Yeah, let's make laws about how to integrate the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, let's keep figuring it out. And we have this conversation around our workplace all the time. We have one of our values at Epifio, our company, is choose integration. And we always say, hey guys, like let's figure out if you want to do an integration experiment, let's see how it goes. And if it does cost the company too much, if it distracts you, if you can't figure out how to make it all work. I mean, in our workplace here, people bring their dogs to work. Almost every company in this building, the dogs are everywhere, and and I'm like, cool, but like, this is, what about children? What about really well-behaved children or children that could integrate really easy? Yeah, it's like, so it's interesting that it took somebody to make that sort of paradigm shift flip, and it may take you doing something a little bit risky, and asking for permission to do something a little bit non-traditional for you to take that one step towards integration. But yeah, I would say we used to all work together. We used to be together all the time. I mean, that was the way that things happened in the Garden of Eden. That's what happened when we lived more an agrarian lifestyle. And so through what's happened with the Industrial Revolution and through the kind of culture we've created, we have to be figuring out ways to be creatively bringing us back to the original design. And the original design was we are together as a family a lot. And so we got to figure that out. And there's a statement that when the Amish, and of course I'm not going to advocate that we all become Amish, but I found it fascinating, because I didn't understand why they chose to be so agrarian. But one of the statements that I heard, a quote, was that when they were making that decision, they had sort of a particular standard, which was, how can a father eat all 3 meals with his kids 7 days a week? Whatever would allow for that will allow from a lifestyle perspective. And that's an incredibly high standard, and we certainly don't get close to that standard in our family. But that's the kind of thing you have to decide. You have to decide, like, okay, what is the standard? How many meals are we going to eat together, and how much are we willing to sacrifice or to bend or to try creative solutions to get to whatever that standard is? And I like what you're saying, Jeff. Push one step into it. It doesn't really take that much before things start to get a lot better, and you start to spend a lot more quality and quantity time together as a family.
That's so good. And it's so true. Me and you could have a whole nother hour-long podcast on just the hilarity and weirdness and paradox and badness of the weird divide between work and children. It's like you do realize all of human history, work was children. Like children and work were the same. Like you needed helpers in the field. Like you literally, you didn't farm with just you and your wife. You farmed with all 12 of you, right? And maybe your ox or whatever. It's just a hilarious. Yeah, it's just we're a very strange, weird culture for the last 100 years, and that's fine. Like we've said it. The ship's kind of sailed. So I'm not saying like we're not going to be able to be farmers. The ship's sailed, but I think we have to very much be like, whoa, we are on a different ship though than everyone else has ever been in history.
Right.
And yeah, just one step of integration. I think we've seen so much life there. Our friends have seen so much life there, and for people who don't know context, like Jeremy was saying, Jeremy doesn't work from home. He's a CEO of a very successful company at an office with employees and staff and projects and multi-million-dollar budgets and projects, all these different things. So most people, I'm guessing, listening are in that same thing. And it's cool to see that you've thought about these things, thought through these things. How do you integrate? And everyone can integrate one more step farther. It does not mean you have to work from home. I think I always get bothered, actually. I think people think that's a weird, like, ideal, when it's like, no, it's just, that's not the solution, right? Like, there's a lot of people, there's people I know that work from home and their family's terrible. That's not like some weird random solution.
We got to push out into the world, you guys. This can't be family as mission. That's, there's like three things that we talk. It's not family and mission where you take the two and separate them. It's not family as mission where you start to think your family is your mission. It's family on mission. It's you're doing your mission in and through the family. And so that's the distinction we're talking about. And when you do that, you push out into the world, into the neighborhood, into the workplace. Like, these places cannot be abandoned by families and by believers. That would be a disaster.
100%.
We are salt and light, but we just have to figure out how to do this in a way that's closer to the way that God designed it, which was for families to steward, for families to rule, for families to be fruitful and multiply. That was the original design. So trying to get a step closer to that is worth it.
Totally. And guys, we actually go a lot deeper on those three paradigms he just said there: family and mission, family as mission, and family on mission. The first two kind of what we would say is parodies or mistakes or falling off the side in some sense. And then the third one being God's actual design. We go a lot deeper on those in the Skill of Fatherhood Masterclass. I think right now that's jeffandalissa.com/family teams. If you want to go check that out, jeffandalissa.com/family teams. You can check that out. I think, or on the social medias at family teams. But I think, so let's talk about then broken homes, right? And I grew up in a broken home, single mom. My mom was awesome, a rock star. It's weird because I feel like single moms, there's a part of this that's, and we got a lot of messages, like it's hard for them to hear stuff like this and like, what do I do? But there's also, man, like I get almost more inspired sometimes by single moms than sometimes even dads, because I feel like they just like, they step up to a level of like leadership and doing everything and wearing all the hats that's really beautiful and amazing and profound. And a lot of the single moms I know are just, they're just like bosses. You're like, man, because you kind of have to be, like, right? Or, for survival. But then but man, my mom was awesome and taught me work ethic and fortitude and character and integrity and all these different things. But that it does provide a different dynamic. So whether it's a single parent, whether that's just maybe like a divorce, whether that's maybe like I know we got a lot of messages of maybe like a 25-year-old, but their older parent, like the parents that are like 50 got, a broken home. How do you kind of start a new thing? I know that's a lot of multifaceted questions, but what do you kind of say there with like, how do you do this when just like the dynamic is not playing well, if that makes sense?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll say one big picture thing about what happens in a broken home, or how to think about some of these challenges. Remember that you are a part of a multi-generational line, and it probably took some amount of progression, negative often, to reach that point of brokenness. And one of the things that in Genesis 12, when God chose Abraham as this sort of model father, he said, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And it's God's intention to redeem all the families of the earth. And so if you find yourself sort of in a valley in terms of generationally, like you've hit sort of a bottom place and there's a lot of brokenness, it's important to understand that part of what you're going to try to do, and part of what God wants to do, is he wants to begin to find someone in the family to begin to redeem that family line. He cares about your family line. He cares about the fact that, potentially 3-4 generations ago, maybe there were believers back there that were praying for you, and the family sort of went sideways, or whatever's happening in that family, whatever the enemy is trying to do to destroy your family line. My first statement to you is like, hey, you really, like, you've got an awesome opportunity to pull the family up from this place. And in 1 or 2 generations, you can make a massive amount of headway. I mean, Jeff, you're really demonstrating that in your family line. And so I would encourage you, like, don't feel like you have to have the epic family experience in 1 generation. It took multiple generations to create brokenness. What God cares about is ultimately redeeming that family. And you can create enormous trajectories so that when they look back and they're like, how did we get here? They're going to look back at you and say, well, my mom made the decision. She drew the line and said, from this point forward, our family is going to be different. And so you have to start from wherever you find yourself. We are not living a one generation story. We are all products of a multi-generational story, as much as that sort of really irritates a lot of, I think, the hyper-individual people in our culture. And because that's a multi-generational family story, it's really important to have hope that what it looks like for you to really make progress doesn't look like what another family. Never, ever, ever look at another family and say, oh, because I can't be like them, I can't do anything. Like, your job is to make your ceiling the next generation's floor. And so if you can make that progress, it's worth it. And you're on the same mission that God chose Abraham to be on, which is to bless all the families of the earth. He wants to redeem your family line. And so it's worth whatever effort you can put into redeeming this family. There's a cloud of witnesses behind you. There's all kinds of generations in front of you. And so it's important for us to sort of take our small piece. We are only living one chapter of a massive epic story. And so, when you read those epic stories and you see the place where the story gets the most difficult chapter, where the hero is sitting there trying to figure out what to do and is it worth it, and that may be your generation, and that is the most critical moment of the whole story. And so when your family story is told in eternity, be that person who really made that shift for the family generationally, and it's that is good work. It's not easy. Doesn't fit really well in the individualistic story that we're telling in the West, but it's the real story. The real story is a generational story. It's not just our life.
Totally. And I think Abraham, like you said, is a great picture of that, because I don't think we talk about this part enough, where like the promise he got, the crazy like prophetic word from God he got, he actually never saw. Right? Like he never saw it. Like he was promised a child. He saw that. Well, two, but obviously the lineage of Israel. But like he was promised a nation. He was not alive to see a nation come to fruition, to see like his descendants number the amount of the grains of sand. He didn't see that. Like we have to wrestle with like actually put yourself in his position on his deathbed, where he got promised a nation and he pretty much just dies with one kid, or, two kids. But, right. So like that, like, I don't think we wrestle with like, man, God is way much longer of a promiser and a fulfiller than we are. But what's cool is he also gave like a glimmer of hope in Isaac. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's a cool tension there of like, he was given a vision that his obedience was going to lead to a whole nation, but he only got the promise came through Isaac, but he only got the one child for the promise. So that's kind of like a both and, and I think that's another thing you can turn that trajectory. You will see some fruit, but you won't see it all, and just be a faithful link in that chain. What
in your lifetime, keep in mind as well, though, that one of the things that Jesus said that was really interesting was he said that Abraham longed to see my day. He saw it and was glad. Yeah. So somehow in eternity, Abraham did see the fulfillment of the promise of God, but he didn't see it in his lifetime. So whatever work you are doing in this, as this link in the chain, like Jeff was saying, you're going to see that fruit come out in eternity, and so that's why it's part of the promise, and that was part of God's sort of relationship that He built in with Abraham.
Totally. So. Okay, one more question or one more kind of place I want to go, and then we can wrap up. And of course, me and you can talk for like 10 hours. And I just looked. I thought we'd only been talking for 10 minutes, and it's been like over an hour. Guys, if you want Jeremy to come back on, let me know on social media with questions and kind of what you want us to follow up on, stuff like that. I think we should definitely have another conversation down the road, maybe in the beginning of the year. But one thing probably, again, the last more frequented question we got that we kind of touched on, but I want to hear you touch on more is, okay, so what do you do then? I guess maybe not if you're in a broken family, but what do you do if like with just your own family, when you feel like you're going a new direction, when you feel called and captured by this story, what do you do when your family, maybe doesn't get it or isn't on board or kind of has a value system that is against what you're doing? Maybe there is brokenness, maybe there is sin, there's all these different things. What do you do there? Because I think, this is just my 2 cents, but I think a lot of times millennial generations, which would be me, I think that's 34 and under currently would be a millennial, with kids, young marriages, young kids. I think too many times we do disconnect from the ship when it's like, just because it's not perfect. And that I think I think that's wrong. right? Like if you like, I think we just, we're going out to start our new thing and, we're going to do this and just separate. And me and Alyssa don't really deal with that because we love our families and we have awesome families. But I think I get that message a lot of like people just like, oh, my family's not that healthy. They're not that good. How do you kind of wrestle with that? And I think the main thing what I'm trying to say here is there's a big distinction between like maybe not the perfect family and not the healthiest family and a toxic family. If it's a toxic family, meaning where it's actually burdening, hurtful, and harmful, being around them, because that's true. And there are families like that. And thank you for starting a new legacy and generation and removing. Like you got to just remove, just get away from the toxicity and the sin and like idol worship. Really, it sounds bad, but that's what the Old Testament would say. It's idol worship, right? And that you kind of like Abraham's dad, and you're being a new Abraham. You're pulling away in obedience and starting something new. But so amen, and people need to do that. But I think there's a difference between toxicity and then people that just like don't have a perfect family. Does that make sense? And I think if you're the person who gets captured by this vision, I think it's incumbent on you to just honor your family. Like it doesn't matter if they believe what you believe. It doesn't matter if they're captured by it. As long as it's not toxic, I think just honor them, invite them into the story, tell them to share, invite them to the dinner table. Some of those tips we've gotten from you, but talk about maybe that. Just what do you do in that distinction and how do you walk through that?
Yeah, so the Bible really seems to indicate that God expects us, that we owe our parents a debt of honor. And in our culture, really, we think that our parents owe us because they screwed us all up. So we know a lot about psychology today, and so a lot of times what's happened is we kind of do know the roots, and sometimes we're right. Like, because my mom didn't love me, or my dad was kind of mean or distant. Like that's kind of why I have this issue and that issue. And so what that creates is sort of an attitude that we start to have around our parents, which is like, you owe me so much because you've done so much damage to me, and that can be true, and so can it also be true that you owe your parents a debt of honor, and that's really what the Bible describes. And so just because we understand more about the roots of some of our issues doesn't mean that gives us license to dishonor the previous generation and all the sacrifices that they did make on our behalf. And like Jeff said, there definitely is gradations here. There are situations that are just so egregious that a complete cutoff is what's necessary. But for most of us, we're owing our parents or the upstream generations a debt of gratitude and honor. And there's not a lot of places for us or ways in the way that we live out family to honor our parents and to honor the previous generations. And so we got to find ways to do that. Let them share their wisdom with us, like bring them into those conversations. A lot of very practical ways to do that I know we're going to share in various ways because there's a lot there that we just have, I guess, ignored as a culture. But there's more in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, that really lay out sort of the law of God. There's more in that area of the Bible about honoring parents than about even caring for children. It is such an important thing to God. A passage that's powerful about this is 1 Timothy 5, which really lays out the kinds of things that you owe the previous generation, widows, aging parents. It says that it's our first responsibility to repay our parents by providing for them in their old age. And that's not something that the church likes to talk about a lot, but when you start thinking multi-generationally and understand this, you start to see, wow, there's a lot there. That models really for our children the way that these generations can stay together and united. And so I think that's a very important kind of neglected element. And it can be a lot of fun. It can be a lot of pain. It can be really difficult to figure out. I would say one other just sort of general thing to consider is that whatever's happening in a multi-generational family, if you have an upstream parent or grandparent, let's say a grandmother who's still alive, they have a very important role in your multi-generational family. And it's important, even if they don't understand it, that you try to understand it and you try to honor it and you try to reflect it. We had this conversation about husbands and wives, but it really goes for parents as well as grandparents, that they need to be honored and that you need to find ways to sort of let them express what this season of their life should be all about, which is oftentimes passing down wisdom, engaging with the downstream generations. When I think about on our sort of family meals we have on Friday night, where we have grandparents present and all the way down to, we have like usually about 4 generations 3 or 4 generations. And those grandparents are the bridge between 3 generations that they can remember that have already passed, sometimes 4 generations and 3 or 4 generations downstream. And so they in a multi-generational family, having a bridge of 7, 8 generations is so important. And so there's lots of ways that we need to find to release that goodness. So yeah, I would say that's a big deal. And if you don't have that, if that doesn't make sense at all, because there does need to be a beginning over an Abraham and Sarah generation as opposed to an Isaac and Rebecca generation, don't be discouraged by that. Don't think you can't live out a multi-generational family. You do need to start from your family and begin to build that into your generations going downstream. So, but if you do have the opportunity to build upstream, man, I would take advantage of it. I wouldn't heap like responsibilities on people upstream. Don't sort of subvert their role or try to lead them in a direction they're not really excited to go. But I would say try to release them, try to invite them, in very loving and thoughtful ways. That tends to go really well.
That's good. And literally, and you've taught us this, literally the best thing and easiest thing that 99% of the time goes well and is awesome and is super low key is just say, tell me more about that, or tell me a story, or remember that time when grandma did this, like, can you talk more about that? Like, just literally let them be chief storyteller. Boom. That's 90% of like integrating into what is so helpful and amazing and beneficial about bringing that multi-generational legacy. And I love what you said. That's so true, that like grandparents are a link between, they're a bridge of 7 to 8 generations, which is insane if you think about. That's just really, really cool and really awesome. I still had a bunch more questions. One of the ones I think that I really wanted to hear and I wanted to talk more about, but maybe we can almost spend a whole episode on, is developing a culture in the home that loves the Lord. How do you guys worship together, read the Bible? How do you train your kids to follow Jesus? Because obviously so much of the stats, whether it's 8 or 7 to 9 out of 10 kids basically leave the home and don't care about the faith anymore. There's so much there, but I think we will put a little pause there, because I think that would be a perfect second episode, because to try to cram that in for the last 5 minutes would be disingenuous and an episode of its own, because it's so rich, I think. So I'll let you leave us with some final thoughts, but first I want to, guys, just thank you guys again for all our support for Family Teams, the relaunch of that, and kind of the brand and the stuff we got going. Guys, we've been so blessed, and our family has been so changed by this stuff over the last 4 or 5 years through Jeremy and April. It's been so cool to partner with them and create all these resources. And so if you don't know, again, if you're listening for the first time, a couple things I would do: go listen to Jeremy's talk. I think a couple weeks ago, it was, I don't know when you're listening to this, but the podcast released in November, and it was called The Day Our Family Changed Forever. So go look for that podcast. Make sure you listen to that. It's an amazing, amazing podcast and talk from Jeremy. And then also we're launching the brand with 5 awesome products and resources coming at you very soon, probably January, February. And everyone who bought the bundle, you're going to get it first before they're available for sale to everyone else. That's 3 awesome books. And then 2 awesome courses. One's a normal course and one's a master class. It's just full chock of amazing stuff. Skill of Fatherhood is the master class. The other course is the 7-Day Family, which is all on rhythms and ritual and how to honor a 7-day week, how to live within rhythm as a family, optimizing your week, family meetings, etc. It's incredible, guys. So many of you guys have pre-ordered all of that. And when you're listening to this, if you go to jeffandalissa.com/familyteams, a lot of you asked, the Black Friday bundle ended, and you were like, hey, can we still get that? I want to get it for Christmas for my husband, the whole bundle, or I want to start the new year with it with my spouse. We took away the $199 deal. That'll never come back again. So thank you guys for who got that. But we did toss it back up on there for $250, and that's still a pre-sale price. That's like $100 off. And that's a bundle where you can get all 5 of our starting resources that'll come out in the next couple months for that crazy $250 price. So again, jeffandalissa.com/familyteams. We know those will equip and encourage you, and it'll also help us keep doing what we're journeying to do in 2019 with all these resources. And then we have podcasts coming out as well, which me and Jeremy have recorded a bunch on. Yeah, that's all I got. But Jeremy, any final thoughts on talking to families, talking to people listening, talking to single people? We have kind of a range of people listening, but I think this was fruitful and encouraging to them across the board. But any final thoughts?
Yeah, guys, I would say, people tend to vastly overestimate what they can accomplish in a short period of time and vastly underestimate what they can accomplish in a long period of time. This is the long game. Please do not try to accomplish so much that you get discouraged or overwhelmed. We have been training in sort of a Western modern idea of family for our whole lives. It's going to take time for this stuff to sink in, for it to become natural. So I would just encourage you guys, like, take your time, really work on this stuff one step at a time. We're going to be here. We're going to be working on resources with you guys and for you guys. I encourage you guys, but don't get discouraged. Don't get overwhelmed. Take a step. Try to make it work for your household, your family, and then take another step. And man, in a longer period of time, over 4, 5, 10 years, massive changes, massive progress is going to happen for you guys. And that's what I encourage you guys to keep your eye on. Took generations to get here. It's going to take generations for us to really continue to move forward and get to where God's calling our families to be. So stay on that path, be persistent, but also don't try to bite off too much at once in a way that might be frustrating and discouraging. So I encourage you guys, it's a great journey. We're super excited to hear your stories about how God's beginning to transform and work on your family in some ways that's gonna really mean massive things for your future generations.
So good. You guys, if you want to follow Jeremy and April and their family, they have an Instagram page, team.pryor. You can follow along with them there, their journey, their family. Also, the Pryors and us, the Bethkes, are always sharing and collaborating and giving tips and resources and peeks into our family on the Family Teams social media pages. So just search Family Teams on Instagram or on Facebook. And then, as always, guys, every Tuesday that a podcast comes out, I do a kind of a big little long explainer about that episode on my Instagram, Jefferson Bethke, where we can have a fun conversation in the comments. So team.pryor, Family Teams, and then Jefferson Bethke for the week this comes out. And that's all we got. And we love you guys and have a good day.